Hi, everybody. It's the Plantbased Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Happy to be with you again today. I missed you last week, really, because March was such a crazy month. Oh my gosh, we had Expo West, a big conference where new and also existing brands can showcase what they've got. And I tasted it all. And so much great innovation is happening. In my last podcast last week, which was audio only, I talked about that. You can go to the Plant-Based Business Hour, leave a review, 5-star review, and you can hear my thoughts on Expo West from last week. Then, of course, there was Future Food Tech. Oh my gosh, where all of the founders coming together, really talking about the great innovations that they are working on right now in the food system and how we're going to fund all of those. Such an interesting conversation. And then, oh yeah, we had a bank crisis in there. The month of March has been a roller coaster ride, which is why I am here today to add a little bit more clarity about what's going on exactly outside the plant-based innovation and alternative protein space, how we can work with other organizations to magnify and amplify our message. Ultimately, of course, it's food insecurity and climate change, but there are natural resources involved, and there's pandemic risk involved, and there's other organizations we can work with that are also interested in bettering the planet that we live on. We can work together to make our message stronger, which is why I want to bring on today the CEO of Christensen Global, Aimee Christensen. Hi there, Aimee. Thanks for being with me.
Hello, Elizabeth. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to see you again. So you and I met at COP27. We were seated at the same dinner table for a great dinner party. And Christensen Global was new to me, just probably as it will be to all of my listeners and those watching live on LinkedIn. Hello, everybody. So maybe you could tell us what Christensen Global is and how you are working to scale solutions for impact.
Absolutely. It's so great to be here. So I've spent the past 30 years working on climate change. I started my career in Washington, D.C. I served in the Clinton administration at the Department of Energy. I had a real passion around Latin American development and the concept of sustainable development. It was a new term, just getting traction. And so I began my career in the energy sector. At the same time, I was raised by a nature educator and a social justice fighter. So my mom was a nature educator and my father was a social justice fighter. He was a builder developer who did things the right way. And so I always believed there was a better way. And so when I got to Washington, D.C., I was able to find my way into promoting clean energy in Latin America, which met our goals as well as their goals for sustainable development, our goals for technology deployment and for climate change, their goals for economic development and opportunities beyond fossil fuels, which a lot of countries didn't have. So I've always been looking for what do my collaborators need and how do we together find a path forward? I founded Christensen Global in 2005, started my career in Washington in 1992. And having been a lawyer and policymaker, I really wanted a maximum flexibility in what I was doing to address climate change. I wanted to bring the law and policy, but also business strategy, public engagement in the moment, what was strategic, but also opportunistic. And so having my own firm, which is a consulting firm, providing climate and sustainability strategy, I've worked across the board from early stage companies to large corporations, philanthropies, to investors. I, as an example, worked with Sir Richard Branson when he was working to align what Virgin was up to with what the planet needed, and so helped launch his big ideas around the carbon war room, the elders, and the B team. Helped Microsoft roll out their global carbon fee, which is a real innovation to incentivize emission reductions around the world in Microsoft's operations. I was at Google from 06 to 07, doing their early climate strategy work, taking the company carbon neutral and launching our first philanthropy project. So my firm builds on this experience to see what's needed. And so right now, my focus is on helping early stage climate solutions companies to scale up with communications, with business development, with partnerships, with investors. And then I'm also working on climate finance. How do we accelerate capital deployment into climate solutions? And so I'm working with a couple of we call them blended capital strategies, where you can combine philanthropy and more concessional, patient, risk-tolerant investment and institutional, traditional market-based investment to accelerate the deployment of climate solutions around the world.
Oh, my word, folks. There's lots to unpack there, and this will probably be the bulk of our conversation. So I want to backtrack to when you said working in the Clinton administration on energy
Yep.
policy, and just say that you and I should maybe connect offline because I'm already working on content for COP28. And one of the content conversations that I'm working on, which I love to do and is personally joyful for me, is to find that Venn diagram in life where we all overlap. And COP27, 28, all the COPs usually around climate. And so I'm putting together a panel, which I now want you to be on, which is where food systems innovation can reduce energy. So we have this Venn diagram overlap of how in shifting our global food supply system, we indeed reduce energy, which is historically what COPs have always been about. So that's an interesting conversation where energy reduction and food systems transformation overlap. So that's fascinating that you come to that with a background. And I find that although not everyone's worked in the Clinton administration, that climate is a door most people are willing to walk through. And then when they walk through it, they realize, oh, there's more to be done here around natural resources management, human health, food insecurity, other sustainability issues that are rocking our world. And when you look at all of those, not all of them, but many of those sustainability issues, you realize that food touches all of them because we transport it all around the globe. So with energy and transportation, there's this natural intersection with food. So it's really in all of our best interests, whether you're working in food or not, to find capital strategies that work. So we talk about this in the month where we had, 4 to 5 banks and maybe more folks teeter-tottering or going under. And so I love to hear that you're working on these alternative capital strategies. Maybe you can dive into that. We talk about patient capital a lot, but maybe you can expand on what you're doing there.
Sure. Well, one of them is wearing a hat that I wore for about 5 years. I founded a regional nonprofit focused on community resilience. I'm in central Idaho, and I moved home 12 years ago, and I realized the global work I was doing on climate was urgently needed here because we were having snowfall changes. We're a tourism-based economy that needs snow in the winter for recreation and needs clear skies in the summer for recreation. So we were having fires, mega fires in the summer. We're having snowfall changes in the winter, the mountains closing early, the trails losing snow. And then we were having water battles between farmers and municipalities. And so we were seeing this lack of resilience. And then also water quality challenges. As we were seeing more dairies being developed in our state, the water impacts. And these are rivers that people love to run, they love to fish, they love to raft, they love to kayak on those rivers. And yet their water quality is being harmed by agricultural activities. So founded the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. And our first 2 areas of focus were on transforming our energy system and our food system. And we wanted to localize and decarbonize those energy and food systems to increase our energy security and our food security, as well as to reduce our own impact on the climate. And we're at the edge of the grid. So our first thing we did was incentivize folks to go solar. We had a whole solar adoption campaign called Solarize Blaine. And then with the food system, we had a fantastic organization that was already in existence before we founded the Institute called the Local Food Alliance, became part of the Institute. And the Local Food Alliance had been working to educate policymakers and increase consumer understanding about the importance of buying local food. And then also doing a lot of connecting, including with collaboration with the USDA's Extension Service, to bring our retailers, our grocery stores, and our restaurants together with our growers, producers, to understand what each other needed to do more local sourcing. And that was all fantastic. A lot of public education, policymaker education, a lot of connecting happening. But we ultimately decided we needed a new tool called the Impact Idaho Fund. And that's a regional revolving loan fund. And the pilot was a 0 interest loan agreement with our borrowers. And we decided to focus on food and farming to start. And we had depth on our team, a real understanding and good relationships with the regional producers. And they needed infrastructure from processing to greenhouses and hoop houses because we are in the northern climes. And so we need a extended growing season. And so that pilot was very successful. And I can just give you a couple of examples. One of them was Lookout Farms, which had alfalfa, which is a widely grown commodity here in our state, often shipped out with all the water it consumes to feed cows in our dairies to our south, or even cattle in China. So we're losing our strategic asset of water in the form of alfalfa. Not strategic, not secure, not smart. This farmer wanted to switch from alfalfa to local market veggies. Needed some low-cost capital to be able to build out their greenhouse and hoop house infrastructure, as well as processing and packaging infrastructure there. And so that was one. And then another one was Itty Bitty Farms, who wanted to grow microgreens for our regional market. And they needed some capital for a greenhouse. And what was so great is that they did their greenhouse in a food desert in the part of our area that had no grocery stores, for about 50 miles around, maybe more. And so they've provided a bit of a storefront there, selling not just their microgreens, but what other locally and regionally grown products as well to increase food access. So those are just a couple examples of our Impact Idaho. And now after the pilot, there's 1.2 million in projects already in our pipeline. So they're raising another $1 million for that as well. And it's under a nonprofit. So that's the structure there.
Yeah, really impressive. There's so much I want to talk about, but maybe I'll start with the last comment first. You're saying $1 million was raised. I'm assuming it was raised locally. So is
locally
that right?
and beyond. People who have a connection to this place.
I see.
And then we're also talking to other philanthropies who are interested in replicating it or learning from it in their place of impact. And so some will. So mostly, yes, local people or people who have a connection to this place, may not be here full time, but care about it, and or people who are interested in innovating in the food investment arena. So the pilot was 400,000, and then we're now raising, the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience is now raising $1 million for its next phase, and but they already have $1.2 million worth of demand in the pipeline, which is great.
That is wonderful. And just to clarify, in case someone's listening who's from Idaho, do you have to be from Idaho to have access to these funds?
No. And what we do is some of them are as far as investing in the fund, some of them are grants, and some of them are what we would call a recoverable loan. So you might say, I'd like to put $10,000 into the Impact Idaho Fund, and then when that money comes back, you can take it out, or you can be part of reinvesting in the next phase. So it's really a revolving loan fund. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But for somebody who might apply for a grant, they need to be from Idaho. Yes.
They need to be from this region. Sorry.
Yes. Right. I know. Of course, they need to be from that region. Okay. That's really helpful to understand. And then sort of going back to all the things that you said and keeping them in my head here, you did mention something rather quickly, and I want to make sure everyone heard it. If I heard you correctly, you said as you increased your dairy activity, the quality of your water went down. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yes. Could you elaborate on that and make that connection for people? I'm not sure everyone thinks of it naturally.
Most probably don't know this, but as of last time I looked, Idaho was the third largest dairy producer in the country. And our dairies are quite near our Snake River. And our Snake River is a very important waterway that goes through Idaho. And unfortunately, and it's not just from the dairies, that's part of it, but it's also commodity practices of agriculture where using fertilizers and pesticides, and without using regenerative practices, when it rains, the runoff goes into the river, as we know. So it's a combination of impacts. And, I think what I try to look for in my work is, what is something we can invest in that has multiple benefits? So it has benefits for our climate. It has benefits for job creation, quality job creation. It has benefits for our quality of life as far as clean air, and has benefits for food productivity and making our soils healthier. So when I look at plant-based investing, when I look at investing in growing local market veggies with somebody like Lookout Farm, they have incredible practices that are restoring the health of the soil, and they're measuring that, and they're reporting on it, and they're tracking their impact. And they're also building a new economic opportunity of local food here in our community. So when I see local food, localizing our food system, it has those multiple benefits: climate security, economic opportunity.
Yeah, really so very exciting and hopeful, might I even say, which is what we like to do on this show. You mentioned jobs, and believe me, I'm coming back to that because it's so important. But I have more of a strategy question. I see the value in investing locally, in building entrepreneurs locally, and addressing food systems locally, and having a circular economy that is local. But I also see the demand, and I think we even saw this at COP27, you bring together the countries of the world, that there's how we feed our community together. And then also, and I see this as fitting. I've had so many conversations around this exact thing with investors lately. Personally, I see this micro umbrella is fitting into a larger umbrella of
Yeah.
how we feed the world globally. And do you see that as working harmoniously or working in competition with each other?
Harmoniously, absolutely. I really see it as multiple strategies. I
Mm,
gave a talk last fall around the future of our food system, and really see it as a need to decarbonize our food system as far as the climate impacts of it, decentralize our food system, and make it regenerative. And you can do those things through localization. You can do that through larger scale production, but change in practices, change
mhm,
in what you're growing, change in your choice of transportation. And so there's so many ways that we can transform this food system. I remember talking with the bread lab up at Washington State University and Cliff Bar and one of our local growers of barley and wheat. And it was really, how do we create a series of regional food systems for bread, for wheat, for the inputs for grains that also feed into a more global system. So you
right.
can sell into a local or regional market, and without the transportation costs and without middlemen, you can benefit the growers a great deal, and then you can sell the remainder into a more global commoditized system, which generally has a lower price point. And through that, we can have more food security and higher incomes for our farmers.
Mhm. And this is interesting because I do want to get to jobs, and I even have one more comment about runoff that I forgot to make before. But let's stick with the price you get when you sell locally versus internationally, because that's interesting as well. Let's talk about what this does to the price of food. Clearly under attack, I'll say, for lack of a better expression. During our inflationary times, food has been hit very hard.
Mhm.
Avian bird flu aside, which would be driving up the price due to a pandemic that also African swine fever does that, mad cow disease does that. But those pandemic situations for animals aside, just the inflationary times have really hit meat very hard and have hit some plant-based meats as hard as well. So how do you see this affecting the price structure when you really focus on a local community?
Well, a couple things. One, you don't have the middlemen or the transportation costs, so you don't have people who are playing that distributor role, right? And then
Right.
therefore taking a piece. And it's a very valuable role distributors play in order to get your products to places. But the extent to which you can make that sale directly, like a farmer's market, for instance, or directly to the grocery store, you can get a better price point. And so then the grocery store can offer it at a better price point and then have more people buying that local food product. Around here, we have a lot of legumes being grown, as well as the local market veggies during the summer months. And legumes are so cheap when we look at a protein source. And
So
so
good for you.
and
Gosh.
so good for you.
Yeah.
Yes. So low cost, great for the soil, nitrogen fixing to benefit our soils, of course,
Right.
and great to be interplotted. I should mention, as we know, that Native Americans often planted legumes in with squash and other. So yeah, hold on. I have to remember squash, legumes. Oh, I was actually looking at a quote the other day from a professor at Santa Barbara who says that legumes are nature's fertilizer factory, and I love that. But she was talking also about, the combination of beans and corn and squash. How could I forget corn? Yeah, beans and corn and squash being really great to be planted together to restore the health of our soils, and even planting legumes as a rotational crop to nitrogen fix into those soils to be nature's fertilizer again. So So I see it as multiple benefits. When you localize the food system, it's the potential to reduce the costs, to increase the farmer income, increase soil productivity, and without the inputs, the chemical inputs that are more expensive. And actually, one of the farms who received a loan through the Impact Idaho Fund, Lookout Farms, was tracking the costs. What is the financial performance of switching from growing a commodity crop like alfalfa versus growing local market veggies? So it's exciting to see how the combination of fewer inputs and also higher prices can benefit the bottom line for the farmers.
Yeah, great to hear that. And farmers, such a big part of our conversation always, as they should be. And I think we're entering into, I speak really generally here, but I think we're entering into the time of the all-powerful farmer. I don't know that that was always the case when big corporation led everything. I don't want to speak as if I'm a farmer. I am not, to be clear, but my understanding is that those contracts didn't always really benefit the farmer. And now, with food as such a central lever to fixing some of our world's most pressing issues,
Yeah.
climate and beyond, we see that farmer being such a critical role. And I look forward to this being a time when they really have negotiating and leveraging power. And I love to hear the stories of them shifting to maybe more legumes or what have you, and getting away from maybe focusing on soy or alfalfa as animal feed, and really protein, clean protein for people. What a benefit that would be, just like jobs. Now, it seems to me like this kind of circular economy would be great for keeping jobs local and keeping that system robust. Am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, localizing our food system, I would just say, in where we have a very seasonal economy. So we have strong winter recreation and strong summer presence. And so having an ability to grow food more year round with greenhouses and some of the technology advancements that have been developing, as well as just to source regionally from a little bit to our south. We're also very fortunate that we have geothermal.
Oh, right.
And so people are able to grow in geothermal greenhouses, even citrus, believe it or not. And so being able to look to nature, whether it's with solar thermal, and there's actually a solar thermal greenhouse at a local school where they are growing tomatoes and kale and selling it to help benefit the school and their income while the students learn about our food system. So just turning to nature, solar thermal, geothermal, as well as technology to extend our growing cycle, to be able to regionalize bring more diverse food to our region, rather than what can just be grown without any support from solar, geothermal, or other technologies, better greenhouses, et cetera. So yes, more long-term income for those farmers. So it's less seasonal, so more year-round income, and the ability also truly engage the local community to be the buyers. So from community-supported agriculture, so where people are signing up, we sign up for the summer with a farm called Squash Blossom Farm, and to source our fruits, our veggies, and then whatever we can't, we work to find also regionally, and if not, then the grocery store. So it's really local first thinking to support and more directly provide that capital to the farmers themselves. And just, I think that COVID really woke us up as far as the lack of security of our food system. We had potato farmers who couldn't sell their potatoes in Idaho, dumping them in the south part of our valley to get it to people who were in need of food because they no longer had incomes because they worked at restaurants that had closed. And so you saw this connection of our food system being disrupted, where those potato farmers didn't want to lose that value of that potato for somebody to be able to consume that food. And so I think it just woke up a lot of us to that we had some fixing to do in our food system.
And we still do.
Yeah. And as somebody who works on climate, like you said, I work on climate from the need to reduce emissions. Like, let's get emissions concentrations down in our atmosphere. Let's also increase resilience and climate adaptation, and the need to help people get through the impacts of climate change. And having more local food growing and more access to local food will help us also get through more disruptions, which unfortunately, not to be on the hope mode anymore, but the disruptions are coming. more and more.
They are. They are. Well, you mentioned it. I've got so many questions. You mentioned it, but what are you seeing coming?
Well, just the increased climate impacts. We're seeing droughts and then we're seeing floods. And so when we don't have that constant weather that farmers have relied on for so long, and then the farms come all at once and it takes the soil off with them, ruins
Right.
the crops, rots
Right.
the crops.
Right.
So it's just that we can't rely on that stable weather system that we had previously for our water and for the growing seasons that we expected. And so it's just nature was so good to us and is so good to us. And, humans, we work to engineer our ways out of trouble, but it's expensive. And
Mhm.
and the people who are suffering are those who can't afford to do so.
Right, is always the case. But it sounds like this could be not just beneficial for the farmer, which is so wonderful, but this might bring jobs to Idaho, like engineering and
Mhm.
capital investment, and let's say more greenhouses, or maybe we'll see alternative proteins, and that we'll find that bringing back that runoff to dairy. We'll find
Mushroom,
right,
mushrooms growing. Yep.
mushrooms growing, or even a cultivated meat or precision fermentation, perhaps. We'll talk about it in a second. Just like you have greenhouses, maybe you'll have that
Yeah.
kind of factory locally there for the West, or locally just for the state itself,
Mhm.
to avoid things like runoff. I'm guessing it's not just the chemicals that run off for a dairy farm, for example. It's not just chemicals, or probably manure running right
Yes.
into that, of course, right into that Snake River. So,
Yes.
um, yeah, so very
Sorry, I didn't speak
interesting
to that. Yes.
to see all kinds of jobs perhaps coming back to the state, and very interesting, and kind of capital inflows coming back to the state if you do end up having capital investments around infrastructure, or that sort of thing. So let's talk about the investments. Who's investing?
Well, I just wanted to jump back to your point, sorry,
Please. Yeah.
about job creation.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that we need to look at is the types of jobs. So what
Mm.
kinds of industries is our federal government investing in? So why are we trying to create jobs in a sector that the jobs are very low quality? They're very dangerous and the pay can be very low. So how do our decision makers think more strategically about what are the assets of our region, our state,
Mhm.
and what are the kind of industries that we want to be investing in and attracting with the tax reductions and other incentives that are provided? And so first, when I look at Idaho, for instance, I look at all of these incredible waters and recreation, and I think, why are we putting a bunch of dairies in a state where we need our rivers to be healthy and clean for our fisheries that also create great economic opportunities for recreation and tourism? And so I think what I am always looking for is being more strategic, and being intentional about the kinds of jobs that we are trying to create and the kinds of opportunities we're trying to create based upon what makes sense for a community, for its land, its people, its culture. And taking that to a more local and regional level and having those conversations before industries are started who then are already invested and then are lasting and they're undermining quality of life. How do we find the industries and the business opportunities, economic opportunities that are beneficial? And that's where some of these cleaner technologies and plant-based food growing can be a real opportunity.
Mhm. Yes, and when you keep your system local, then just almost de facto, people have more information about the food they eat, because their
Yeah.
neighbor is doing one part of the food equation, and then their other neighbor is doing another part, or maybe they are. So there's that general knowledge about food, how it's grown, how you cook it, and all of that knowledge around food we have lost. So it's sort of the gift that keeps on giving. I bet the state of Idaho's really happy to have you. Let me ask you, have there been other states that have tried to replicate this? And what must one have natural resources like the beautiful state of Idaho to be in this lovely position?
No, I mean, I think that, well, to answer your second question first, I would say that any region can look at its natural assets and see what it makes sense to invest in. There are a number of authors who've written a lot around local investing. Hold on, Schumann. He's a former lawyer who's written a lot about local investing and is really kind of a guru. And we actually brought him here to Idaho. So we have I'm just going to find his name for you.
Sure.
So
Go
it's
right ahead.
Michael Schumann. So Michael Schumann has written a lot around local investing, and our economic development organization in our region has an annual summit and wanted to look at how local investing could benefit our economy by diversifying it to not be quite so reliant on recreation and tourism, so that when things like COVID hit, no one's traveling, when climate change hits and people can't recreate, that we have a more diversified economy, including through local food. And so we brought Michael Schumann and a number of other speakers in to talk about local investing in these strategies. And so a lot of communities around the country are pursuing local investment strategies, and it can be a combination of just individual to individual transactions, to a group getting together and putting together a small fund, to getting access to some public capital, local county capital. We have a land and water fund here in our county, put together by the county, and that invests in projects to benefit and protect our land and our water. And so it's really a matter of having community conversation about what do you want to build, what kind of capital is needed, where can it come from, and reaching out to philanthropies and government, local governments, even universities. And in the food and ag space, the USDA Extension has been a real partner in our local community to provide some of that matchmaking between our growers and our buyers, the retailers.
What about reaching out to corporations? So we talked about how this local community fits into the larger scale of global food production. How do you see, if at all, working with large corporations, either for their distribution channels or their advertising budgets, or how do you see yourself working with the crafts of the world, let's say?
Well, so I would say that my experience has been working with companies on their climate strategies. And where we are now is, and where I see this so much, is reminding people that changing what we eat and what we feed our employees as a critical tool for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I remember when Puma was looking to address its greenhouse gas emissions, its planetary impact across climate, as well as other resource consumption. And they realized that leather was their number one impact. And so they looked at some plant-based alternatives for leather. And that was going to be a real game changer for that just that one lever could dramatically reduce their impact on the environment. And so as companies are starting to look at how do they get to net zero, how do they make these commitments to walking the walk for the planet, it's interesting to see people start thinking, oh, what can we do to change in our employee cafeterias, what we're feeding our employees, to change the footprint of our company. Also, you can talk to an IKEA or a Walmart, and when you go into IKEA, you get those meatballs that they serve at the IKEA. Well, now they have plant-based meatballs, and part of that is it helps reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of that company. And so you find there's finally people are starting to think outside of energy, think outside the box, think outside of energy, to how do we address, where does food play a role? Where do animals play a role in our supply chain and in our core business? And how can we change it to benefit the business and the bottom line and our customer relationship too? Because I remember, Walmart looking at its environmental impact in the very early days, maybe 2007, 2008, and saying, oh, wow, we could source more locally and for farmers, and we could attract customers who are looking for lower cost and local and better, healthier grown produce, and to help them reach a new market customer segment. And so it's looking for these solutions that are good for the planet and for the business, primary business, and its brand and its stakeholder relationships.
100%. I don't see these things at odds at all. I looked to a study that was done with LinkedIn, and they took their cafeteria 2/3 plant-based. So not even 100%. They just put the meat options towards the back, a little bit harder to find them, but they were still there if you wanted them. There was 3 of them. There used to be 5. And then they switched that, and they put 5 plant-based options instead of 3, and they brought the plant-based to the forefront. At the end of just 1 month, they saved 14,000 CO2 gigabytes of CO2, tons of, thank you, 14,000 tons of CO2, and they also dropped their meat consumption 50%, and they were getting comments from consumers. or their employees, thank you for helping me be healthier. If someone puts chocolate cake in front of me, I eat it. If they don't put it in front of me, I don't eat it. So I would love to say that, I am one of strong willpower, but it just helps you find that easier, healthier solution when it's convenient for you. So some really good statistics coming out of LinkedIn Cafeteria in San Francisco.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's exciting. Okay, so what are the big corporations in Idaho? I think of Hewlett Packard. Is that right? Are they headquartered there?
They're not headquartered here.
I
Micron
see.
is headquartered here. So a
Mhm.
chip maker is headquartered here. We have our healthcare, so St. Luke's and then Albertsons is a big grocery chain that's based here in Idaho. That's just acquired Safeway in the last year or so.
Yes.
And then we have Simplot. And Simplot is agriculture. They started with potatoes and they do a wide range of agriculture related business now as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Again, the great state of Idaho. So why don't you tell us about your event that you have coming up in June and who should go?
Thank you. So the Sun Valley Forum began in 2015 as a real chance for me as I was founding the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience to connect the local and the global, to showcase the local innovation and leadership and what we were doing here, but also to learn from the global innovators on how could we transform our food system and our energy system, and also connect those global innovators to each other. Oftentimes I'll go to a conference and it's all about energy, or it's all about food, or it's just about corporate strategy, or just about investing. We try to bring it all together to highlight what are the solutions that need to be lifted up, replicated, provided capital, and connect them to the partners they can work with to accelerate the deployment of those solutions. What's working already? And so every year we have 4 key topics. How do we localize how do we transform our food system? How do we transform our energy system? How do we mobilize capital? And how do we engage and inspire and activate the public? And this year we added well-being as a 5th topic. I think it's tough times, whether it's going, the reception, the bank failures, there's a lot of chaos, the climate impacts. I think there's real honest fear
Stress.
out there and stress. And so
And
how
it's
do we
not
come
ending.
together? Yeah, so it's an annual gathering of 300 people. And we come together to share the strategies, to build partnerships. And also this year we added a new type of session, which is called a multiplier effect session, where we bring together intentionally a group of people around a specific solution and help to accelerate it in the time that we're spending together during the conference.
Great.
Yep, right here in Idaho, very much a global conversation. And so this year we have the Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center with us. We have Vanessa Nakate, who's an incredible Ugandan climate activist who's promoting, really wants to help build a green schools initiative to help schools be built green, but also and learn about greening through our schools, to investors, CEOs, and innovators all across the board. And it's a great place to get grounded in what's happening in this moment, what's promising, and who can I find to collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. About how many people attend?
300.
About 300. Yeah, that's awesome. And anyone can go. So should I send people to christensenglobal.com? Is that where they'd find information?
Yes, or sunvalleyforum.com directly.
Yes. Sunvalleyforum.com. Okay, as we kind of wrap up here, remind me, I think you are plant-based vegan. Is that right? Remind me. You are.
For 20 years.
I was going to say when and why. Okay, so 20 years ago. And what prompted you to do this?
It was May of 2003. I remember it very clearly. I was already vegetarian for about 10 years. And I went to an event hosted by Farm Sanctuary. It was an event in New York City to celebrate. And there was a video about the dairy industry and Mary Moore, and I just said, oh no, I knew this, that every reason I'm vegetarian means I need to be fully plant-based. And so that moment, it was just quick and clear decision. And of course, 20 years ago, it was harder than it is now. Now there are just so many more options everywhere
Yes.
I go. And even if there's nothing on the menu, if I'm out to dinner with friends, I just ask and, oh yeah, the chef does this and they love it. And,
Yeah.
and the good thing is beans are cheap. Beans are low cost. I love legumes. I'm just, tonight I'm making a bean soup and I just love, it doesn't have to be a plant-based meat replacement. But I did have one the other night. I was at a friend's house. They wanted me to bring my protein because they were having fish. So I brought up Beyond Sausage. It
Love
just
that
makes it
product.
easy if you're going to a barbecue or something. I mean, bring a portobello, of course. But if you want to, I usually bring extra and then I offer taste to people and they love them. We had this celebration of relaunching of my firm in middle of 2020 when I handed off my nonprofit and relaunched Christensen Global, and we'd have vegan barbecue outside. And I will tell you, the guys were just loving the sausages and the burgers. And I even had wings and I had corn dogs. And, I had healthy, really wonderfully fresh tomato salads and, of course, just naturally plant-based, wonderful veggies as well. But it was really nice to introduce that to people. And our local Culinary Institute asked me to do a plant-based, they wanted a vegan comfort food cooking class. So we're working to get that on the agenda as a result of our barbecue.
That is so fun. When I threw my niece's birthday party, same thing. I had, basically a bunch of meat eaters at my house and I was like, okay, Beyond Meat for everybody. So it was on the grill and I had the sausages and, people were like, hey, this is great. They wouldn't have gone there on their own.
Yep.
But, next to the potato salad, they were like, I'm in, count me in. And really those sausages, boy, does everyone just go for
the
those.
Beyond sausages are great. Yeah.
So great. So great. Okay. If you had to make predictions, on the show, I used to say, make predictions for 10 years out. Then it was 5. And now I don't even bother. I just say 3. Things are changing so quickly. And I think that adds to everyone's stress load, as you were saying. So let's say 3 years, and let's talk about food only, not the world, the planet as we know it, just food. What kind of change do you think we'll be seeing in the global food supply system in the next 3 years?
I do think that we're going to see more local and regional, more processing. Processing for veggies and for meat, more processing, more regionalization, more decentralization, because we're just seeing more and more awareness of the lack of resilience of our food supply chain. I think we will continue to see increased plant-based eating. So just less meat and dairy, more of the plants alternatives, whether they're beans or plant-based meats or milks. The reason why I remember I was at the Milk and Global Conference in 2016 when Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google at the time, said, number one opportunity, investing in plant-based alternatives. And then the Bloomberg report a couple of years ago, talking about the trajectory of billions of dollars in the plant-based foods market. The reality is, yes, we'll see some hiccups along the way, of course, but the cultural and the economic and the climate realities. So the combination of having more transparency into our food system and understanding what we're eating and where it came from, and having the internet provide more transparency and just more awareness, and then also the climate imperative. I do see that continuing on to be an increase in this transformation as people just make more and more of that connection.
Yeah, 100%. You're referring to the Bloomberg study that came out saying it would be the plant-based sector would be $166 billion by around 2032. Boston Consulting Group says it'll be about $290 billion between 2035 and 2040. The imperatives that you mentioned, climate change, food insecurity, natural resources management, an efficient food supply system, mitigating pandemic risk, lowering human healthcare costs. I mean, the list is pretty long. So those imperatives are there. I think the big hiccup, beyond pandemics, stopping people from going to work, et cetera, I think the biggest hiccup is just the negative information campaign put on by the meat and dairy lobby to try to slow this competition that is, who wants a competitor? I understand this, but it's the consumer that suffers when misinformation is put forth. And I think that's a real hiccup. But the rest of it, it's all happening at relatively speaking, lightning speed for something as old school institutional as our global food supply system. Things are changing rather quickly, and investment is coming as well, even if we're having another hiccup there, which I guess would be the banking system.
Yes. And Elizabeth, I'll just add one last case
Please.
study that I wanted to share with you, which is actually, it's from the Impact Idaho Fund. And because I was talking about dairies earlier and concentrated animal feedlots, we can all of us, no matter whether you eat meat and dairy or not, we can all be against concentrated animal feedlots. They should be outlawed, get rid of them. For the animal treatment, the labor treatment, and the impact on the soil and water and air around them. We know property values, it's just bad. And that being said, as I work on food system issues, one of the loans from the Impact Idaho Fund went to a micro dairy here that was started by a young man whose family is been farming for generations, organic. And he what I love about this, because I've seen dairies in operation where they don't do this, he keeps the babies with the mothers. So it's literally 12 cows, keeps the babies with the mothers for a couple of weeks, and then just takes them away for half a day, enough to have a little bit of extra milk, take that, right, sell raw, organic, amazing. And then they are back together. And so that structure, when he's selling directly to market, allows him to have that, right? He doesn't have to optimize for mass numbers, optimize for efficiency. He can optimize for co-benefits for that soil, that water, that air, the treatment of the animals, and the health, because the milk, of course, is much healthier when it's raised that way. So we've gotten way off track, and we need to get back on. And plant-based, I have a friend who, she's plant-based unless she knows exactly where the meat or dairy or whatever came from, right? She just, and that's how some people will choose. So I try to be really open with people, like, even if you are 90%, and even if you're doing like she does, we can make such a difference. And
100%.
fastest thing we can do to benefit our climate.
Yeah, 100%. Every step helps. Every bit of progress is indeed progress. No judgment here. I personally think we're going to see a hybrid of local and global. We're going to see a hybrid of plant-based and, let's say, regenerative ag, or you're calling it sustainable ag. For those who don't know, in dairy, because I didn't know this, I'm so embarrassed to say I didn't even know that a cow had to be pregnant to make milk. I just thought, well, don't they just naturally make it? Seems to be everywhere. Like I didn't even know that. But so to just be really clear with people, if you don't know, in the mass farming of dairy cows, that business equation is built on breaking the bond between mother and baby. That is its success, is breaking that connection. So, if you've ever had children, then you know just how horrible that is. Okay, so as I move on, I'll say these are supposed to be rapid fire questions for you. And that is one sentence, if you can do it. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Oh, gosh. To have a bit more patience. To have a bit more patience. I can see where we're going, and I want everyone to get it really fast and get on board and get excited. And then it's going to take a bit to show the steps to get us there. And so continue to have the urgency, and also make sure that I continue to have the patience with those who are coming to it newer, or from a different background or different perspective. I landed in Idaho 12, 13 years ago back home, and just kind of a setting of recognizing agriculture is the number one driver of our economy, and dairy is a big part of that. And so how can we build a new agricultural system? And now I feel like we're on that track. And so I think it's patience and knowing where you're sitting, where you're at.
I love that. Keep the urgency, build the patience. I love that. That is just a wonderful perspective. Okay, again, rapid fire if you can. You're having a bad day, things aren't going your way. What is the one phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
I'm not alone.
Oh, that's a good one. And believe it or not, that's the first. I've been doing this show since 2018. That's the first time I've ever heard that one. That's a good one. I'm not alone. Okay, people, hold on to that.
So many people out there doing their best.
Isn't that so true? Same day, super busy. And this time it's not just that it maybe or maybe not is not going your way, but you are super busy and you have no time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Oh, almonds and dulse seaweed.
And seaweed? Almonds and
So
seaweed?
raw organic almonds and dried dulse seaweed. If you combine them, it's like this nice salty protein.
Okay, everyone, you know what
Oh,
to
also
do
walnuts. I often mix. I have it my bag right here. I can show you. It's a mix right now. It's a half organic walnuts and half organic almonds
with seaweed. Okay.
with seaweed with dulse. Yep.
I'm show us. Yeah, I want to see it. Look at that dull seaweed. That's amazing.
And
Okay.
I put the almonds and the walnuts in there, and I've got it in my purse.
Okay, I do a lot of walnuts and raisins, so I'm not
That's
going
great.
as naturally
I'm a
healthy as you, but
savory. I love savory, more sweet. So.
I'm a sweet. Well, we talked about chocolate cake, vegan chocolate cake for me, but even the vegan chocolate cake, folks, please don't put it in front of me. That was just don't do it. So I tend towards the sweet as you are, Aimee. So great to have you with me here today. Everybody, I hope that this has been a knowledge drop and a wealth of knowledge for you, because I'm trying to broaden the conversations that we have to leave just solely only the food space and in our case, the alternative protein space as we look at that massive global scale, but also start having these local conversations, these regenerative conversations, these climate and energy conversations, as Aimee and I will continue to do. So for everybody, please thank Aimee with me for being here. Thank you, Aimee.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I can't believe we didn't even talk about cultivated proteins, but we'll have to save that.
In a way, this is what I wanted it to be, because I talk about that stuff so much here, and so I'm so happy and grateful to you for bringing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Thanks you for all that you do to drive capital into the space, as well as knowledge and understanding. Thank you.
Oh, I sure do appreciate it. Aimee, you stay put and don't go anywhere. Everybody else on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.